Welcome to the Kentucky History Channel, where we strive to bring you all the Kentucky history content you want and you deserve. Kentucky is a part of all of us, and we plan on covering all the history we can, from Pike County to Fulton County, from Louisville to Harlan. Here on our YouTube channel, you can find many videos dedicated to different events, people, governors, and places in Kentucky. There's something for everybody. While you're here, if you like the channel, hit the subscribe button and the notification button so you get notified anytime new Kentucky history is available. And if you want to support the channel, we have a Patreon page as well, or patreon.com/kyhistorypod. So in 1793, that's when things, you say, I'm going to say things change, but really it's more of the same. It's just an event happens. A big event happens. Morgan Station is thriving. There's plenty of crops and animals are being raised. A road is constructed to Morgan Station, and the residents kind of begin to spread their wings. Some people moved out to begin their own stations, and others moved into the station. They became kind of relaxed, took down a few of the defensive measures, the stockades, and the front gate. They all took that down. Some of the men stopped carrying their guns while they were out. So you get this kind of change of attitude, I guess, to say it that way. On March 31st, Easter Sunday, the inhabitants of Morgan Station were Abraham Beecraft, James Arthur, Jacob Allington, Peter Cutright, and old Miss Allington, Alexander Baker, Joseph Young, Harry Martin, and Robert Craig. And some of these people had families with them as well, not just these singular people. But there were 2 blockhouses, 2 gates, one for wagons, and a stable. And the station was about 150 by 95 feet, which that's not really that big, not that big at all. And maybe I might have those dimensions wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's what it was. And that's just not that big of a station. About 100 people attended an Easter service given by Reverend Hansford, but nothing happened that day at all. So, pretty peaceful. But
right,
the next day is when things change. And as I said before, Jacob Wade was there for all this event, all this stuff happening. He was one of the workers at the iron ores, and one of the good firsthand accounts was recorded, and it was in this book. He'd been interviewed after the account, and he gave a pretty solid testimony about what happened. And so I'm just going to read from the book what Jacob said. And 2, I'll go ahead and set up kind of what was going on too. So like some of the stations that were around, the Native Americans kind of came down. They went to one station and attacked it, and then they kind of headed towards Morgan Station. And some of these people they saw them coming, and they just kind of in some ways panicked in many situations, But anyway, so this is James Wade's account. I turned my horse into the little stable, took out the bit, gave him a few ears of corn, and went into Harry Martin's house, where I was best acquainted. I was just about to sit down. Miss Martin handed me a chair, saying, "I've got some money for you for the corn," when the alarm was raised, and we both ran out. Martin delayed to jerk down his gun, and I got out first. I never said anything, either to Martin or Hansford, about that money. The moment we went out, we saw the Indians. By the ingenious, but not to say humane measure, they both effectively evaded in pursuit of a fight more rapid than the prisoners were capable of making. I called for them all to go into the blockhouse, and went in myself, first Joe Young, and all the women and children following. There were 2 blockhouses that I had expected them to go in, but but all after me went into the one. I ran into the blockhouse, expecting to find other men and guns. When we got in, I found there was but one gun, and that Joe Young had. All the other guns the men had taken with them into the fields. So that's not a good. That's not a
No,
good
I don't want to be
situation.
so young. I want to be the guy with the gun.
Yeah. Looking through the shooting port, Martin, thinking there were but two or three, ran with all his might in their direction, with his gun in hand, and relieved the pursued, not knowing or having had time to know anything of the actual condition of the station. I now looked out through a porthole and saw an Indian in advance carrying a beautifully finished rifle in one hand. The polished brass on the butt glittered as it caught the rays of the sun, and in the other a shining tomahawk brandished over his head. Suddenly he fell on one knee and aimed a fire at Martin, who was running straight at him, within fair range. I wouldn't have wished for a prettier shot than a man so running, but he missed. Martin, startled on seeing how many Indians there were, turned back and joined with Beecraft and Duncan. Some 10 or 15 steps behind followed 30 or 40 Indians, all spread out in a line and making toward the station. I thought from the look of them not more than 30, but the prisoners who returned later said there were 36. That's a
That's
lot.
a huge number of people when you
Yeah. A fire, just as effectual from the whole line, followed that of the chief. They then raised the yell. As soon as Joe Young heard the firing and the yells, he jerked open the door and ran out. His wife caught him and clung to him, but he loosened her hold and broke away from her grasp. I saw Young pitch up on all fours. I thought he was wounded or shot, but he had only stumbled. The fall knocked his hat off, but he picked it up again and continued straight on. He and Andy Duncan, who, when he got in, had kept right on running, through the station, got together and made their escape to Anderson's station up above Mount Sterling. They there represented that there were 150 to 200 Indians. The frightful accounts of the number of Indians prevented speedy relief. Young afterwards said he had but 2 bullets at the time of the attack. Now, I do believe that might have been some exaggeration on how many how many people were there.
right,
But seeing that Young and Duncan both just hightailed it out of there, we
which
might
is
see
wise.
where they're. Yeah. But I mean, Young left his wife and everything,
Yeah,
tore her away. Harry Martin came along in the junction of general flight, took out his butcher knife, and cut loose his wife's petticoat. Then he picked up the elder child and, pointing to the younger, told his wife to take it up and follow him, wheeling a little to the left as they went out on the lower south side of the station. They soon got under the hill and were out of sight over Slate. He crossed over Slate about the mouth of Little Slate and said he stayed that night over on Peeled Oak. If he had been pursued, they would have gotten his wife and children with him. When he got to Montgomery's next morning, he had to leave his wife out some distance from the station till he should go in and get clothes for her. So another man cut his wife's clothes off her and then took them out and ran away. Um, so pretty interesting. Um,
absolutely.
Old Miss Arlington, mother of Clarendine Arlington, who was living at the station, went along with Martin as far as she could go. When overcome with fatigue, she lay down till night overtook her, and then made her way to Pleaks. A little girl of Beecrafts, is that right? Beecrafts, Becraft, Beecrafts.
I think so. I think so.
Yeah. A little girl of Beecrafts, Ruth Beecrafts, was running just a little before in front of Harry Martin, was no doubt accidentally shot with a ball intended for him. She seemed to wheel around and then drop down. I saw her fall. When we afterwards went to her, we found her shot in the right hip. Suppose the force of the bullet drove her around. When I ran inside, I went no more thinking to fly than of this moment getting on my horse and going to London. I would have stayed in the blockhouse for just the one gun. The burning of the other cabins I think, would not have set this blockhouse on fire unless the wind happened to be unfavorable. They were some feet off. Finding the blockhouse deserted, I ran to the stable to catch my horse. The stable made a part of the fort wall. The stable was no longer of any use to me, as I didn't live there. It was the only thing I lost, except my hat. My escape and freedom from injury was not an Indian, I believe, came in there. Indeed, they could have come in between any two of the cabins in the front instead of going around. There were woods adjoining the fort. They might have all gotten into the fort that way, without any of our seeing them, but they were afraid to risk life to get in. I thought if I remained there much longer to catch him, the Indians would certainly have me. So I just ran out, not waiting to close the door. I expected certainly to lose my horse, but when I got home, he was there before me. I ran right across the fort to the lower south side with Alexander Baker, but a step or two before me, I am confident that I was the last person that run out. The Indians, whom I thought had all gone to one side, seemed to have divided at the north side about equally and come around so as nearly to meet us as we ran out. Indeed, they seemed to fire so carelessly. I wondered at the time that they hadn't killed some of themselves in pouring their volley upon us. Some were within about 10 steps of me. The women and children were flying in every direction. Baker was a big fat Dutchman. It was impossible that he should have escaped. Oh, come
God,
on. Come on, James. There's no need for that.
it was the heat of the moment. He was a little less forgiving than he should have been.
Yeah. I thought I thought if I could get before in front of him, it might it might possibly save me some. Oh gosh. I thought if I could get before him, or if I could get in front of him, it might possibly save me some. Just then he came tumbling down with a very heavy fall right before me. Not 10 steps beyond him, the firing seemed to be sharper than ever. I afterward counted 9 bullets that had been shot into a white oak stump, which I was just then desiring to throw between them and me. Nothing seemingly could exceed the random of their shots. Even Baker was only grazed low down in the shank, the ball glancing up the leg, tearing up the skin in its course till it shattered the knee. They killed Baker as he went down. Just so people know that's not what um, uh, James Wade said. 2 Indians pursued me about a quarter mile to the creek. Finding they were distant, returned to the spoil at the station. When I ran across Slate below the mouth of Spencer, and then Little Slate, and went through now Jefferson Bott's place, kept too far out to strike Peter's Fork. I took round and went down to Troutman's station to give them word, lest the Indians would come upon them unawares. When I got to Troutman's, they were out there with their guns. Russell, an African American man of his, had been out hunting and saw me cross the wagon track that had been opened. First year corn was hauled from the station to the furnace. Having dropped my hat just after leaving the station, he took me for an Indian and gave the alarm. I questioned him to the place and soon found it was me that he had seen. They gave me a horse and also dispatched the news to Hansford's. From there, I wheeled upon Stepstone Creek, gave the first information at Montgomery Station, where I knew were some good soldiers. I then came round to my brother-in-law's, Pleeks, on my way to my father's. When I got to Pleeks, I found the whole country round about there had gone to Mount Sterling. I heard they had already been at my father's, and so I didn't go there. Didn't get my gun till the next morning. My mother had taken my rifle and was on her way with it to Mount Sterling, and understanding that I had been killed, would let no one have it to bring to me. 2 or 3 men told me that they met her and asked her for it. She said I was killed, and what was the use of taking the gun? Abraham Beecraft had gone to my father's and told them that he had seen me jump into the wheat field, and that as I jumped, the Indians fired a volley upon me and shot me, and that 2 Indians then jumped over upon me. This he said he saw, but that wasn't true. So as you can see, that I find it a pretty thrilling escape by James Wade. But it's interesting to see how the I guess how it went about, how they were immediately going to raise the alarm to others and kind of spread the
Right.
word. So there's a bunch of people that were involved uh, in the attack, and we'll kind of talk a little bit more about some of them. But out of all of them, the Martin family was the completely intact family to survive the whole thing. Miss Arlington, the older lady, also went with them. Um, so big time attack and event. A lot of stuff happening. Um, they burnt the fort to the ground and so forth. But um, pretty interesting. The story doesn't end there, so keep going there.
Oh, yeah, it is. You're right. It is interesting, and the fact that the Martin family were able to survive in one piece really is shocking. And Ralph. The sad thing is, I guess Ralph Morgan had finally got around to moving his family to Morgan Station. At the time that this was happening, and he and his wife had gone to Boonesboro to get supplies, and they had left their children at the station to keep them safe. And of course, the exact opposite was really the situation they found themselves in. So while they were gone, the boys hid in a sycamore tree and waited for the battle, to end. Um, Meanwhile, the cabins were set on fire. The natives surrounded the fort, shot and captured anyone who tried to flee, and it was just a gruesome time. And then, you know, the day after Easter, they came through on the ridge and captured. I'm stumbling over my words tonight.
It's okay.
Captured a few people at Abraham Beechcraft's cabin, and then turned northward and headed uh, to Morgan Station. So they came through the fields. A number retreated, kind of as you indicated in red there, into the station. Two were shot and killed in the fields. And by the time it was all over, 19 prisoners had been taken and 12 had escaped. Enoch Smith led 150 men in pursuit. So again, we see the Kentucky militia trying to rally. Um, on their way, they found two dead. Sadly, it was a mother and her 6-month-old baby. So just a reminder that this was a war of not just soldiers, but of civilizations. But they got close to Ohio. They realized the group had split, and one was headed west, the other northeast. So they decided to send an express rider to Simon Kenton. As you said, your first problem is defense, and then after that, it's warning others, and that's
Hmm.
what they were trying to do.
And they knew who to call when
That's right.
yeah, so they call on Simon Kenton. He gathers up about 30 men and then pursues them into Ohio. He came across the trail. He finds out that where the natives are camped, and this is an excerpt from the Kentucky Gazette. Kind of talks about this, but there's some conflicting stories about was the native camp that Simon Kenton came upon the actual, uh, the Shawnees who had came to Morgan Station, or vice versa. They didn't really know for sure. However,
Right.
there's a big conflicting stories about was Tecumseh involved in this. Was he part of the group that raided Morgan Station, or was he part of the group that Simon Kenton had found? Uh, in Ohio. Was it the same group? We don't really know. I know in Alan Eckert's Frontiersmen, well, maybe it was the Sorrow for Our Hearts. Uh, he states that Tecumseh is part of this thing, but there's really no evidence to know Tecumseh would still be about. I mean,
Pretty
20
young.
years younger than say 1812 Tecumseh. So possibly, but I don't know. I'm kind of on the more unlikely. He might have just been a follower, if anything, maybe. Um,
Right.
I don't really know. But there's another interesting connection. So James Ward um, and John Ward. So John Ward was at Morgan Station or in the area, and supposedly his half brother James Ward, who would have been half Native American and known as the White Wolf, very likely was with this party, and they would not have known anything about each other. Um, But a
Right.
very interesting turn. That's another story. It sounds like we might need to get into and find out about. But
Yeah, absolutely.
so many interesting facts or interesting players kind of come into this. We talk about Simon Kenton Tecumseh. We've talked about those people, and here, this one little bit of history they still playing a part in, or their names get brought up in. So just interesting.
Oh, yes, they cast long shadows through history, and
Mhm.
that's certainly true. And, once the battle is over, what you would expect to happen pretty much happens. The settlement around Morgan Station, we talked about the years prior, how nervous people had been building a stockade and then taking it down. All that anxiety comes back, and it's abandoned for a while. And that also means there's no one to work the ironworks. So an ad's put in the paper trying to get workers to come back. The militia is called up to protect the area and set on guard. And slowly, enough men trickle in that the iron furnace, is able to begin its second year of service. So that in itself, I think, would be considered a victory by the folks who were there. In the end, though, 18 people are captured, 10 are killed on the trail, and two were thought to be killed on the trail, but actually ended up surviving. So again, speaking to the confusion and everything that's going on around them in the midst of all this, five end up being released, but one was never heard from again. So, as with so many times in these early days, you're stuck with speculation.
Mhm.
Two people were killed at the fort. 12 people escaped during the attack. So they're really the lucky ones. They're actually able to get
Mhm.
outside and get away. Ralph Morgan himself finally shows up, and he's done. He sells his half of his land, his cousin, the half where the station once stood. But he builds a new settlement in the area. So this piece of land, he's not leaving Kentucky, with this piece of land, he's kind of washed his hands of, and trying for a new beginning. So definitely made an impression.
Yeah, yeah, and so so on this, while some of these captives were being taken, I guess so. Some the natives thought they killed two people, but those people were wounded, obviously. But that would be the two that weren't killed, but were eventually found. One of those ended up dying, I think, a little later, probably complications from the wound. But more incidents kind of occur with the natives, with different tribes and so forth in the area, but nothing to the extent of this raid. Um,
Right.
Two men were shot during digging at the ironworks. Two African Americans were taken prisoner and later escaped. When they returned, they were able to get their freedom. So on August 3rd, 1795, a peace treaty was signed, and Elizabeth Young, Benjamin Beecraft, and Susan Baker were released. Um, um, Joseph Young and his wife Elizabeth. Um, Joe ran, if you remember, he ran away. But when his wife Elizabeth Young was released, they were reconnected. That would be an interesting conversation to be a part of.
I was coming
uh,
back.
2 years later,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm sorry I ran away there. Um, an interesting story. So William Whitley, bring him back into the fold here. He went south to some Cherokee and was doing some dealings and so forth with some Cherokee in the area, and caught word of this girl they had with them, and it ends up being Susan Baker, and he's able to bring her back. So if you think like how, 2 years later, she would have went north, but somehow ended up back south. You wonder about how that actually happened. Um, but again, there's one person that was never heard from again. So either, well, the only option I could even think of would be that she just stayed with the Native Americans and did not return. Um,
Right.
because I mean, if or they killed her and left her in a place that was not found, but that seems a bit more unlikely as well. I don't know why they would hide that one killing. Um,
Right.
but anyway, like you said, Ralph Morgan finally makes it out there. But after the Morgan Station situation, he kind of fades away in his social life. He was a big player coming into Kentucky and wanted kind of to establish himself, but just after the raid, it took a big setback, and or he took a back seat, I guess, and kind of lived out the rest of his days. He dies in 1820. The exact date is a little unknown. Jacob Myers died in 1802 uh, at his home in the Hanging Fork in Lincoln County, and it's an interesting connection too because I pass the Hanging Fork almost every day, just about it, driving outside of Stanford. Um,
Yeah.
so pretty interesting. One thing I did want to bring up is a guy that comes up here in this story a whole bunch is a guy named William Clinkenbeard. And the reason I just want to mention him is because that is one of the most unique last names out there, Clinkenbeard.
Yes.
Yeah, but yeah. So that's that. Interesting story. We can wrap it up here. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, it's interesting because it really is, like you said, the twilight of that sort of attack. Is not the last person to ever be killed by Indians in the state. And like we said earlier, the possibility of small groups making their way in, anything's possible. But these large raids that are big enough and have enough manpower to challenge whole settlements, that's coming to a close. I'm sure the people there didn't feel any safety after it was over. There was no way for them to know that they were
Mhm.
at the end of that. But a new part of Kentucky history is dawning, and it's going to get a little better, at least in that sense.
Yeah, yeah, and again, the book "In Search of Morgan Station: The Last Indian Raid in Kentucky" by Harry Enoch. It's a very good book that really describes the situation, what's going on, the people involved, and so forth. And highly encourage you to get it. It's probably at the library, your local library. There's one here in Lincoln. If you want an actual copy, you can go to the Montgomery County History Museum there in downtown Mount Sterling. They have copies there you can buy if you're interested in that. But it's a really good book for the time, and really does a great job documenting all the events and the players in the moment there. Um, and it provides a lot of firsthand accounts of people interviewing because they came and kind of interviewed a lot of these people and said like, "What happened? Tell us about what happened." And some of the accounts can be a little contradicting in ways, but these are people who were a little older and so forth. But the you know there's some good ones in there that really kind of set up what it was like at the moment and so forth. But yeah, like you said, it's a new dawn. It's a changing of kind of the times, and was it the last Indian raid? No, but probably the last of it probably was the last one to that magnitude. It's probably
Yeah.
safe to say. Um, but yeah, um, pretty good book, pretty good Kentucky history. So I encourage you to go out and get the book if you want to learn more and so forth. But we got some more New Republic coming, more governors, more just Kentucky history. So anything else?
I think that's it. Looking forward to the next episode and leaping forward in history.
That's right. Well, thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Take care.
Welcome to the Kentucky History Channel, where we strive to bring you all the Kentucky history content you want and you deserve. Kentucky is a part of all of us, and we plan on covering all the history we can, from Pike County to Fulton County, from Louisville to Harlan. Here on our YouTube channel, you can find many videos dedicated to different events, people, governors, and places in Kentucky. There's something for everybody. While you're here, if you like the channel, hit the subscribe button and the notification button so you get notified anytime new Kentucky history is available. And if you want to support the channel, we have a Patreon page as well, or patreon.com/kyhistorypod. You've probably heard about Daniel Boone, but what about the rest of the frontiersmen who came to Kentucky and settled? That's what we want to bring to the Kentucky History Channel. The stories of the untold, the stories of those forgotten. One thing to expect on our channel is great Kentucky content. Some stories that you've never heard of. The Night Riders, who began in western Kentucky. Bloody Monday, the riots in Louisville. The assassination of Governor Goebel, the only governor ever assassinated in the United States. Stories from all over Kentucky, stories that are unforgettable once you've heard them. You can find out who counties in Kentucky are named after and how your county got started. From beginning to end, we plan to document every county in Kentucky, all 120. Reach out to us on all of our social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and also leave a comment on one of our YouTube videos. You can also check out our podcast episodes. You can subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and many more. We're always seeking to find more Kentucky history so we can bring it to you, the viewers, the listeners. We want all the stories and all the events from Kentucky's great history to be told and shared everywhere.